Namaste and welcome viewers. A brand new episode of Mirror Prime. I'm Ashish Pareek and it's World EV Day today. And on our show, we'll be diving into the electrifying world of electric vehicles in India. Some like it, some love it, while the rest mockingly say that they don't want to carry a fire extinguisher around. Whatever your opinion of electric vehicles is, the sales numbers paint a very optimistic picture. As per the latest data, 50% of three-wheelers, 5% of two-wheelers and just 2% of cars sold in India are electric. In fact, EVs are making strides, but is it really a revolution? While the sales numbers are promising, we can still have significant hurdles to overcome. Price, range, charging infrastructure are the big three issues that concern electric vehicles. In fact, charging stations are still few and far between, and the speed of charging can also feel like watching a paint dry. Range anxiety also makes people call EVs just a city phenomenon. Let's not also forget about the environmental angle. Are EVs really as green as they claim? The production process, like a lot of people have pointed out, is energy intensive, and we also need to consider the entire life cycle of these vehicles. So, a lot of hype around electric vehicles, but also a lot of questions as well. To discuss that and a lot more, joining us on the broadcast, Dr. Sudhir Mehta, Chairman and MD Pinnacle Industries, Subhabrata Sengupta, partner Avalon Consulting, and Hormaz Sorabji, who's the editor at Autocar India. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. I'll start with Dr. Sudhir Mehta now. Sudhir, this is of course electric vehicles that we're talking about, and the first one that comes to my mind is Reva. I mean, I still remember it was dismissed as a glorious, glorified golf cart. A lot of people did not take it seriously, but again, it was touted as the future of EV tech in India. It was way back in 2001. We are now in 2024. How far have we come?
So, Ashish, thank you. And we've come a long way. Let me set the context. India is already the third largest auto market in the world. Last year, India produced 24 million vehicles, out of which roughly about 2.5 million were vehicles which are non-private and the rest are private. So the market size is huge. And you're right, Reva did set the trend. Chetan Maini was one of the pioneers in this who brought this about. But today, this is the single most important manufacturing opportunity the world has. Auto is about 40 to 45% of manufacturing in India. And by all reckoning, 30 to 50% of this during the next 5 to 7 years is going to go through and move to EVs. So you're talking about the single biggest manufacturing shift the world has seen, and the same will also happen in India. So to answer your question, yes, EVs are here, EVs are moving, and certainly India is going to be at the forefront of this change.
Absolutely. I'll take that point across to Subrata Sengupta. Subrata, I've been hearing about EVs for the past 2, 3 years now, and the only thing that you hear mostly is that EV is the future. When do I know it's the future? Is the future now? Is it 5 years later? Because every time we talk about when you start talking about EVs in details, there are always multiple issues that come up. For some, it's the pricing that's an issue. For some, it's the range anxiety. For some, it's again the charging infrastructure. So, host of issues. So, when exactly do we expect EVs to actually arrive and be a viable option or alternative for buyers?
So, I would say in some segments, EV is the present and not the future, right? So you just presented the numbers. So in three-wheelers, etc., EVs are majority now. If you look at the, I would say that in some segments it's the present. But I think there needs to be an expectation reset on both sides. So initially, when there was a lot of talk about 100% EVs by 2030, etc., and let's be real, that's not going to happen, because currently the way EV tech
Correct.
is and the way it is, we have some visibility for over the next few years. It's not going to be 100%. It's not going to be 100% anytime soon, right? But a significant proportion of two-wheelers and some portion of four-wheelers can easily convert to EVs. So, and we would see this gradually happening. It's not just about the product, although the product limitations that you talked about in terms of charging times, in terms of range anxiety, etc., these are real. But practically, bulk of the privately owned vehicles, two-wheelers or four-wheelers, rarely travel more than 30 kilometers a day. So that's not so much of an issue. But I think, other ecosystem related issues related to finance, related to second-hand market, etc., also need to be resolved. So it's a infrastructure, I would say, ecosystem issue which needs addressing on multiple fronts. I don't think directly subsidy is the answer. So subsidy is not the silver bullet, and I don't think subsidy is going to come in private vehicles in a big way. But whatever comes in may likely
Correct.
maybe targeted towards public infrastructure and public transport. But let's see. I mean, I think I am pretty bullish in terms of the EV, but also realistic enough to admit that EV will not be 100% anytime soon unless there is a significant shift in technology.
Absolutely. Mr. Subhabrata, you spoke about subsidies. I'll take that point across to Mr. Saurabhji as well. Mr. Saurabhji, again, a lot of people talk about the numbers that, EV manufacturers are posting, the sales figures and everything. A lot of that has to be attributed to the subsidies as well, the 5% GST or the FAME subsidies. But also you see this trend as far as the government is concerned, a lot of that is slowly being pulled back. Do you think the sales and the numbers and the fact that EVs are a lucrative option right now for the buyers, will it be the same after all the subsidies are pulled back?
Well, I don't think all the subsidies are going to be pulled back in a hurry. I mean, yes, we have FAME. We have to see what FAME 3 is. We still have a 5% GST on EVs, which is really quite low. That's a pretty good subsidy. But, honestly, I think the EV problem is not so much whether there's subsidy or the subsidy is being pulled back or the range. It's a very fundamental issue, and that is the access to home charging. I mean, that is turning out to be the biggest bottleneck. While we might just be doing 30, 40 kilometers a day, you still don't want to go to a public charger because it's inconvenient. A lot of them don't work. In fact, Tata Motors has a very good statistic that over 90% of, let's say, Nexon buyers all have home charging. So what does this tell you? So many didn't buy an EV because they don't have home charging. So I think home charging is turning out to be the biggest bottleneck right now. And, until that is accelerated, of course, there are challenges. Everyone doesn't have a dedicated slot, leave alone a slot where they can attach a charger. So this is definitely one issue. Then I think, we've also moved from the stage of the early adopters to the early majority. Now, the early adopters, they just went in, they were EV evangelists. They were willing to take the pain and uncertainty of what an EV brought with it. But I think the early majority are taking a more pragmatic view, maybe even a more skeptical view. And there are two questions which are still unanswered right now, purely because EVs haven't been there long enough. One is, what is the resale value going to be? And that, I think, is a bomb waiting to drop because resale values anecdotally are looking quite bad. And second, what is the battery life? Now, there's a lot of confusion over there because these cars come with 8-year warranties for their batteries, but it doesn't mean the life is 8 years. That's the warranty of the battery. The battery can go longer, but we don't know how long the battery is because cars haven't been around for 8 to 10 years. So a lot of unanswered questions. But I am bullish long term. I think there is a bit of skepticism right now. But I think, as a city solution, nothing beats an EV. I mean, I drive an EV every day. We have a couple of EVs in our fleet. And at least for town, I'm not talking about out of town, as an urban solution, it is absolutely fantastic. The way it drives, it's a superb automatic. It's smooth. It has a lot of pluses that come with it. But I think there are a lot of questions which are unanswered. And that is what is causing a little bit of, let's say, skepticism amongst the consumers.
Absolutely. Dr. Mehta, a very interesting point there raised as well about how a lot of people prefer home charging instead of actually charging outside because of various constraints as far as technology is also concerned. And before I come to that, one other point that Mr. Saurabhji also raised here, which I really want to talk about, is the resale value. I mean, we all talk about the resale value as far as your regular cars are concerned, but nobody really talks about it in terms of EVs. Do you think it's also a major concern because that's an area that nobody seems to have explored so far? I mean, with EVs, you usually have a technology-oriented vehicle, and after a point, after, say, for example, 4 or 5 years, that technology becomes obsolete. So the resale value would pretty much be nil. I mean, nobody would want to buy a vehicle which has a technology which is 5-year-old.
So, Ashish, let me answer both points. The first point is on resale value. Fundamentally, an EV has lesser number of moving parts than a conventional vehicle. So actually, the maintenance required on an EV is much less. Also, the life of an EV is going to be far greater. The third thing which is going to happen is the battery prices are expected to go down. So as the universe of EVs goes up, the battery prices will come down. So which is the primary cost? And battery has to be actually equated to fuel. Now, the other game changer which is going to happen in India over the next 10 years is the fact that solar is coming in a very big way. Now, think of a scenario 10 years from now, and this is not too much far into the future. The government is now talking about 100 million households which have solar at the home level. Now, you're talking almost kind of the holy grail, because you have solar for free or near close to zero cost, and then you have EVs, whether they're used for personal or three-wheelers or two-wheelers, or for commercial transport. So you're talking about a complete change in the way our ecosystem will work. And secondly, related to this also is, I think we need to segregate the discussion in personal vehicles and vehicles which are used for profit. Fundamentally, EVs today are profitable if you use them more. If the car is going to be in the garage 95% of the time, then probably the cost factor equation doesn't work in EV's favor. But if you take a bus, you take an electric three-wheeler, you take a two-wheeler which is used for, let's say, last mile deliveries, the equation is extremely, extremely good. So this is where the market will determine where the shift happens. And you can see this by the numbers. Last month, more than 50% of three-wheelers sold in India were electric, where they were nowhere in sight 3 years ago. So this kind of change is happening. The same will happen in buses. And actually, the biggest contributor, or rather the biggest differences that can happen, is the advent of buses. India needs 8 lakh buses, which is what the government is talking about. Imagine if we are able to do that. Our penetration is low.
Correct.
Now, all of us suffer in cities. We are spending gridlock time. It's time that we focus on buses. It's time that we get hundreds and thousands of electric buses. This is not an expensive option, and the unit economics are cheap. It's less than 2 rupees a kilometer per passenger. You can't get a cheaper mode of transport. And if this happens in a big way, I think we can cut the gridlock. This is not spoken of enough, but I think public transport deserves a much bigger chance having electric vehicles.
Absolutely. Dr. Mehta, like you rightly pointed out, this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of scenario. Different people, different usage, different, different preferences, different priorities. And of course, the usage and also the savings also differ. But Subhabrata, a lot of people talk about how having EVs is a good option right now. Do you think the fact that there's also range anxiety, yes, with more and more vehicles coming in right now, we are seeing the range also slowly crop up, but there is still a range anxiety. Like, for example, if I were to buy an EV today, I wouldn't do it unless I have a city purpose. I wouldn't consider taking it, because even if I take it out station, my eyes would constantly be glued to the range meter. I'd be scared of running out of energy, of running out of charge. So do you think that's also a major concern why EVs in a way now are limited to being just city toys?
Yes, to some extent, yes. I won't say city toys, but primarily, if you look at the private usage of vehicles, it's primarily a second vehicle, or where it is very clearly defined that it is going to be used only as a limited area vehicle, right? So if it's I know of certain instances where maybe it's an old couple who use EVs only for short hauls, visit to the doctor's clinic, to the market, etc. So those kind of applications, I've heard of some applications like this. But but if you look at a primary car of a household, then obviously there is a need, or there is a, even if it's not used, there's a perceived need of a greater range, and EV would find it difficult to crack. But I think what Dr. Mehta also mentioned, that there is a sitting duck here, which is public transport. So you have seen what is happening with Blue Smart in Delhi and Bangalore, and increasingly you are also seeing Ola Electric and electric fleet of Uber and so on and so forth. So I think that is something which is changing and which will change quickly. So if you look at it, from that angle, then even in the four-wheeler segment, about 20% of the vehicles are actually commercially used as taxis. If you see the usage, and you have another solid 10-15% which is second or third vehicle in the family, right? And if you see in the Indian market also, the segment which has converted quickest to EVs has been the luxury segment. So the BMWs and the and such like,
Correct.
I mean, a large portion of their sales are EVs, right? And that has happened because most of it is the second or third vehicle in the family, and is moving. Now, what does it take to make EV
Correct.
a viable option for the average user? I think one of the points that Umas mentioned about charger is valid. Home charging is important, but also, increasingly what you are finding is that in office areas you are getting bays dedicated for chargers, right? That also to a certain extent solves the purpose, right? The only thing is that commercial charger versus home
Absolutely.
charger, there is a pricing
Mr.
difference.
Saurabh ji, I'm just running out of time on the broadcast. I
Sure,
also
sure.
wanted to sneak in a question that a lot of people that I've spoken to have as well, and I'll ask Mr. Saurabh ji to answer this. Mr. Saurabh ji, now one of the arguments that you hear when you see on social media as well a lot is the fact that a lot of arguments for EV is that it is a very green mode of transport. It's cleaner. It's a better form of energy. But also the argument against it is the fact that what about the production? Everyone talks about the emission at the tailpipe. It is almost zero. So yes, EV sounds like a great option. But what about production, the mining, and the entire process? Is EV really as green as it is projected to be?
Well, one thing is very clear: EVs are cheap to run, but they are not. Sorry, EVs are clean to run, but they're not so clean to build. But again, there are a lot of studies on this and a lot of debates. At the end, the EV does win because, let's say, even with your worst mining techniques, which are very energy intensive, let's say in places like Australia, as opposed to places in South America where the lithium is on the surface and doesn't require much energy to kind of extract. Uh, Within about 10,000 kilometers, it goes of driving zero emission, it goes in favor of the EV. So I don't think that's really going to be a valid thing. And as we get energy gets more and more renewable and sustainable, it'll only go in favor of the EV. So these are just, arguments on social media to kind of grandstand and, have a counterpoint. They're kind of popular, which people go. So I don't buy that at all. And just one more thing I want to say on range, while it's not an issue, I just want to say today very proudly that we have set a Guinness World Record for the longest distance traveled on a single charge from Bangalore to Navi Mumbai, and that record is 949 kilometers in a Mercedes EQS without charging. So obviously we hypermile, but
Wow.
what it tells you is that range is also coming, and we are very proud that we've set this in India on very difficult Indian roads. The last record was 916 kilometers in the UK, a Ford Mach-E, which was again a Guinness World Record, and we have beaten this Guinness World Record, 949 kilometers on a single charge in a Mercedes EQS on Indian roads, monsoons, potholes, diversions, the works. So range is coming. That's no longer going to be an issue, but I think the charging infra has to pick up first.
Absolutely. Mr. Saurabh ji, in fact, this reminds me, I in fact did pose a question a long time ago to Mr. Nitin Gadkari about this. And one of the things that he had to say is the fact that this is a new technology. It needs a lot of hand-holding, and the government is here to do it and ensure that it prospers as per expectations, and also it is the future. And in fact, the government seems to be doing that as well. And also the manufacturers are also coming out with new technologies that is now making the entire EV technology more cleaner, more greener, and much more efficient. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us on the broadcast for this very interesting discussion here. All right, viewers, on that note, it's a wrap on Mirror Prime. Lots more lined up on the other side. Stay tuned.